Good morning, Nigeria. Today we shall focus on the fallout of Africa CEO Forum in Kigali.
The 2026 Africa CEO Forum was held on May 14th to 15th in Kigali, Rwanda, focusing on regional trade, digital transformation, cross-border public-private investments, and built around actionable solutions for Africa's economic scale.
Now, the forum attracted over 2,800 participants drawn from 77 countries, including several African heads of state who discussed how to transform continental alliance into tangible economic assets.
The forum focused on the theme, the scale imperative, why Africa must embrace shared ownership, bringing together business leaders and investors to tackle transnational growth.
And the program was divided into high-level executive dialogue, open debates, and strategic invest-in sessions with core focuses.
They include shared equity and how African pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and private investors can pool capital to boost continental infrastructure and cross-border expansion.
And in addition to shared infrastructure by overcoming fragmented markets, by funding regional mega projects and harmonizing regulatory and legal frameworks across borders.
Well, Jemai, we must also add that there was, shared frameworks by leveraging initiatives like the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System to facilitate seamless digital transformation and cross-border. It is on this note, I welcome you to Good Morning Nigeria this Tuesday. I'm Ian Region.
And you want to know what we're going to talk about? Stay tuned to the NTA. I am Juma Yusuf. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria, and just before we begin, we bring in our guest for our conversation on Africa CEO Forum in Kigali. Let's take this background report by Ibrahim Bedlukuda.
The Africa CEO Forum held in Kigali brought together business leaders, policymakers and investors from across the continent to discuss Africa's economic future and the challenges affecting the private sector growth. Central to the discussions was the need for stronger economic integration among African countries to unlock trade, investment and sustainable development opportunities. Participants noted that, despite the establishment of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, several barriers still limit business expansion across borders. Poor infrastructure, inconsistent regulations and complex custom procedures continue to slow intra-Africa trade. Leaders at the forum emphasized that improving transport networks and harmonizing policies will strengthen economic resilience across the continent. Nigeria's President Bola Ahmed Tinubu used the forum to highlight economic reforms, regional cooperation, and private sector-driven growth as key solutions to Africa's development challenges. He presented Nigeria as a country undergoing major economic transformation aimed at attracting investment and ensuring long-term stability. Tinubu defended his administration's policies, including the removal of fuel subsidy and foreign exchange reforms, describing them as necessary steps towards building investors' confidence and strengthening Nigeria's economy. He also urged African nations to deepen collaboration to increase trade and economic cooperation across the continent. Another major focus of his presentation was youth empowerment and job creation. Tinubu described Africa's growing youth population as a major asset and called for greater investment in technology, education, entrepreneurship and digital innovation. He stressed that supporting startups and developing digital skills will help drive economic growth and competitiveness in Africa. The forum also highlighted governance, political stability and accountability as critical factors affecting investor confidence. Concerns over corruption and weak institutions remain major obstacles to development in some African countries. As discussions continue on Good Morning Nigeria, key questions will include how African countries can maximize the benefit of African Continental Free Trade Area, improve regional trade, tackle governance challenges, and create stronger opportunities for economic growth across the continent.
All right, many thanks, Ibrahim Bedlukuda, for the background report. Let's get into the conversation now, and time to introduce our guest seated with us right here to discuss the Africa CEO Forum in Kigali. Nigeria's participation in that particular conference. And we have Dr. Abdulrazak Salihu Ibrahim from the Department of Political Science and International Relations, Now University. Many thanks for joining us, sir.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, Nigerians.
All right. Also here is Dr. George Korede Martins, CEO, EDI Entrepreneurship School. Many thanks, sir, for being our guest this morning.
The pleasure is mine. Good morning, Nigeria.
Thanks. Good to see you after a while.
Pleasure.
And also joining us from our Lagos studio is Dr. Nicholas Rame. He's a senior research fellow and head of the Division of International Politics of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. You're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's return to the studio and begin the conversation. It's a hot conversation, actually. I've been following the trips that the president went on. It was a round trip, sort of, from Kenya, Kigali, and all that. And it's like Africa is coming out with a strong voice that now we need to take control of our resources. We need to come together, to work together, so that Africa can progress beyond where we are. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you once again for having me. I think the summit highlighted some key takeaways. One of them is that Africa is done talking about her potentials. And the key issue now is for her to either scale up, integrate, or be left out of the global economic competition. So, the highlights of the summit emphasize that Africans have realized the urgency that we need to take in order to scale up with other, to compete with the global market. Most especially, the pockets of disintegration that we have in our economy, from Nigeria to Niger, across the whole of the Africa, we need to take an urgent step in order to be able to meet up. Failure to do that, which was equally highlighted in the summit, is that we are bound to fail. And why should Africa fail? That is the question that is begging for an answer. Because the potentials are here, the human capital, the resources are here. However, the challenges are the political will and the level at which the policymakers can cooperate and ensure that they implement all these decisions.
Did Nigeria position itself properly, with all of this in mind?
I think yes, because Nigeria have realized that her foreign policy, which used to be Africa first, initially should equally focus on Nigeria first. Our president made that declaration. Nigeria first, then Africa first. It's like a combined foreign policy outlook. Because if you didn't fix your house well, how do you now fix the whole of the continental and regional economic policy? So this, I think, is a wake-up call and the realization by the Nigerian president that yes, we have some challenges, and for us to take the lead, we need to fix all our challenges. We need to make sure that we position ourselves as the global leader so that others can follow suit. For example, Nigeria, which is the giant of Africa, as is always put, we are still struggling with the issue of power. Nations that are having lesser population than Nigeria, they are producing more megawatts than Nigeria. And this is not rocket science. We are blessed with a lot of potentials. So if the national grid cannot be used, then we can invest in solar, we can invest in other energy sources to augment. So the policies that the government must put in place and then ensure that all these things are made, we now position Nigeria as truly the global regional leader that which we are.
Quite interesting, actually. And Dr. George Korede Martins, let's bring you in before we go to Lagos. You know, a major theme is emerging from this forum, you know, that the argument that Africa can no longer grow through fragmented national markets alone. Leaders repeatedly pushed, you know, for the idea of shared ownership.
Yeah, shared ownership for Africa. It presupposes that Nigeria will not just stand alone, and Africa, as you rightly put it, will not grow when we are disjointed. So Mr. President talked about Africa first, having, you know, taken a leaf from Nigeria first policy. Africa first will mean that all African countries need to come together, look inwards, and see how we'll make use of the opportunities that we have. Now, Africa as a country has a large percentage of the mineral resources, you know, as given to us by the Almighty. And then the way and manner we manage these resources, it really matters. You know, Nigeria, that is the President of Nigeria currently, Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR, is the current head of the authorities of the ECOWAS. And he made it a standpoint that we need to promote intra-regional trade within first the ECOWAS sub-region before taking it to the continental scale. And it is only when you are united that you can achieve this success, the development that we so require as a continent. So we cannot develop when we are disjointed. There must be a seriousness of purpose amongst us as nations within the African continent. Take, for example, in the area of the natural resources, we're looking at our mining, you know, subsector. We have a lot of resources. There's hardly, you know, a nation within Africa that does not have quantity of mineral resources. How are we mining these resources? How are we doing it? Are we encouraging foreigners in the name of wanting to invest to cut away our resources? Mr. President said in Kigali,
especially the rare earths.
The rare earths. He said in Kigali, the era of pit to pot is over going forward, meaning that when you come into Nigeria or come into Africa to mine resources, especially the rare earths you talked about, initially they will cut them right there from where they are mining spot and then take it to the port abroad. He's saying that we now have to turn them into manufactured products. You know, a lot of resources that we have, you know, in Africa that needs to be manufactured, turned into usable products and to benefit our economy. You know, there are policies. You know, the world over has policies, and Nigeria as a country has policies written, you know, well dusted, perfected in books. But those who are saddled with the responsibility to interpret and bring to bear these policies must be encouraged to ensure that sentiments do not come in. Where investors, you know, signify interest and then bringing their money to invest in Nigeria, nobody should say, please see me behind the scene, as the case may be. What is my own personal interest in it? We need to be patriotic as Africans. It's when investors, foreign investors, see us do this, that they will see that we're actually serious and we truly need this development.
Talking about that seriousness, when you talk about you know, an end to Pete's to port, right? From pit to port, right? I'm thinking that he was serious about that, you know, statement because, like Dr. Elia mentioned, we have power issues, and these are required if you want to run, you know, big manufacturing companies and all of that. Insecurity is still a concern, and you just mentioned corruption, of course, which you know, are factors in limiting that progress. But let's get to Dr. Irame now. You know, we're talking about the roundtable in Kigali, and it's in the bid to attract investors, you know, to Africa. I'm thinking that if Nigeria is truly ready to walk the talk, really ready, you know, position itself in the forefront, you know, in Africa, considering policy inconsistency, which has been, you know, a major issue, forex instability and regulatory bottlenecks. Do you think that Nigeria has what it takes to compete with small African countries like Rwanda that are increasingly attracting investors as a result of efficiency and policy clarity?
That's a very brilliant question. If you study very well, you see that the drive towards sustainable economic development in Africa is not one that tries to be competitive. Rather, it's one that looks for the complementary role that countries can play in ensuring that Africa attains sustainable development, particularly in line with what they call the Agenda 2063. So whether Nigeria is positioned for it, I would say yes. And this is because if you look at Nigeria's economic growth over time, look at Nigeria's population, and look at every other sectors in the country, then you see that Nigeria is also ensuring that this positioning itself in this drive. And good a thing that the president did not just leave this kind of important summit to the captains of industry. He also played a lead role by so doing, not just Nigeria, also recognizing the role leadership could play in all of these issues. So Nigeria has its own internal challenges, just like Rwanda and other countries. But on a global scale, I think that Nigeria has also done well in terms of responding to these issues. And some of the issues that have also discussed, that were also discussed, if you study very, very well, the president also acknowledges some of the challenges he is also facing within the country, internal challenges, and perhaps how to address these challenges in order to ensure that Africa attains or actualizes sustainable economic development, which has always been a major problem. One, then, of course, if you go historically again, you see that right from the Lagos Plan of Action until where we have gotten to the African Continental Free Trade, Nigeria has always played lead roles in all this. And not just because we don't have internal challenges, it is the fact that Nigeria has a manifest destiny in Africa, and that it has continued to, to guide the kinds of actions or inactions Nigeria takes at the regional level, and even to ensure that it portrays Africa in the global stage. So the question, the answer would to say that yes, Nigeria can, match one-on-one with some of these African countries. But like I said, at this point, the position should not be about who has much more economic resources, rather to say that what complementary role all countries can play in order to bring to catapult Africa out of its current economic quagmires.
Okay, I like the fact that you brought up the Africa free trade, continental free trade area, and with the stronger push for African economic integration. The Africa free trade area has not really left the table, the planning stage up to now. We've been hearing about it, but it's not there. And this forum is focusing, on African integration. When do you think we'll be making the full use, the full power of the Africa Free Trade Area to further enhance our connectivity and also in business and culture itself?
I doubt whether anybody would ever be able to give you a definite answer to say today or tomorrow would be able to fully harness it. But if you study very well, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement itself, it's a process, it's a whole lot of process, and African really understands the usefulness or the need for them to bring this trade together. And if you listen carefully to what my other colleagues have said in the studio there in Abuja, you see that economic integration has always been one of the bones of contention in Africa. And this is because, if you study very well, one of the challenges that had always pulled Africa back is the lack of economic growth. And in doing this, and it is in this line, African leaders understood that there was a need for them to come with what they call an African Continental Free Trade. And in this, of course, there are other bottlenecks. And don't forget that Africa is also facing a whole lot of problems, for issues of armed conflict, issues about leadership challenges, issues about resurgence of coups, and a whole lot of other internal issues. And these issues, they kind of one way or the other also affects the chances of the actualization of the full potentials of the African Continental Free Trade. But again, one of the most important things, which again our president also recognizes in the CEO African Conference, is the whole issue about migration. It's the whole issue about free movement. Because even if you look at the ECOWAS protocol on free movement, you see that one of the challenges has always been that the inability, for people to walk freely around the ECOWAS state, which itself is an impediment to growth. And that itself is a good thing that the president also discussed that with the president of Rwanda. And that, for me, I think is one of the things African leaders must be talking about, because there's no way we can achieve sustainable economic growth, without talking about free movement, without talking about common currency, without talking about removals of all kinds of obnoxious, custom bureaucracies, because all these themselves affects the possibility of actualizing the full potentials of the African continental free trade. So in a nutshell, why the African continental free trade itself is a very, very noble idea in Africa. What we have, the real challenge now is that there's a need, one, for collective effort and strong political will to drive the idea to ensure that Africa actualizes this thing, because it is much more important to say that Africa needs to have a common economic strength in order to match with the global south.
Dr. Rame, great point. Dr. Corridor, you want to respond to some of the things that...
when we say that the Africa AfCFTA has not really taken off, it is... you look at people that are actually benefiting from this already. Yes, we need to coordinate all these efforts, but the Nigerian Export Promotion Council, they're actually doing a lot. Nigerians are benefiting from this. It talks about non-oil exports, promoting wares, fabrics, and the likes. And you find, trainings ongoing, Nigerians taking advantage of this, factories being opened by people who are actually, manufacturing, sewing clothes, and taking advantage of reduction in terms of tariffs, taxes. So it's going on. It's ongoing as we speak. But people just need to look inwards, check the internet, go to the right agency of government, make inquiries, and then take advantage, of the African free trade, arrangement. It's ongoing, and it's about to be over.
Yes, that's all about industrialization, and Inyere also talked about power.
Mm-hmm. Yes, power is important because that is the wheel that drives, progress. Yes, we have generation places in Niger State, the Shiro dams, the Kainji Dam, and all that for decades now. But we need to take advantage of what we have in the northernmost part of Nigeria. From northwest to northeast on the desert lands, we can have a sea, of sustainable energy there. We can have all those. But we have challenge of insecurity over there, which government is doing all they can to ameliorate these challenges. It now speaks to you and I as Nigerians. Are we going to continue to benefit from insecurity and forget about development? Now, down south, you have a sea of water, oceans, rivers, that right at the shore of those oceans and rivers, you can have windmills that can drive, energy. It's available, it's possible, it's there in America and the developed world. Bring them in, put them there. So government also needs to sit up and ensure that all these things happen, because insecurity in the south is a little bit reduced compared to what we have in the core north. We give kudos to the security agencies, the military, and what they are doing so far, and we trust the Almighty Creator that these challenges will be ameliorated.
All right, Dr. Gordy, there's some things that should just happen. It's not about praying or trusting. It's about doing the right thing.
The right things.
Right. Dr. Salihu Ibrahim, some people just, when they hear about such conferences, or if you like summits, they just think that it's another talk shop or another opportunity for the big people to go take pictures and just wine and dine together. Some do not think that concrete actions are coming out from such discussions. I want to know what you think, really, if the countries that participated, of course Nigeria is our focus, is really ready for some of this talk, to translate them to action, considering the fact that many African countries are still borrowing heavily instead of building economies that are independent, right? So speak to us, really, the way some of these African countries are being run, the governments themselves, are we positioned, to take the lead, and become self-reliant without dependence on the West?
Thank you for that brilliant question. I think from the theme of this last summit, you can see the urgency that the African continent have realized. That is, you either scale or you fail. And we need some metrics to be able to measure the implementation process, so that it will not be like they are gathering again like what has happened in the previous past. But I am optimistic to a very large extent because of the key takeaways that came out from this summit. They've realized that the government position, that is the regional government position, should be more of regulatory, that is they should regulate the policies that will allow the private sector to drive this economy. They make some example with the Dangote industrial refinery and industrial hub as a key example that other countries can look forward to adopting. But if you look critically, even the Dangote refinery, when it was about to take up, there were a lot of bottlenecks, and that is not giving a right signal for other people that want to invest heavily. And thank God for the refinery, because what we have, the global crisis now in the Middle East, you can see that it has affected the energy supply across the world. If we don't have Dangote providing almost 20 or 30% of our oil supply, that means our economy will equally be downtrodden. So what we want from the governments now is that they should do away from lip services and concentrate more in putting the right infrastructure and then removing all the bottlenecks. For example, Kigali is taking that advantage. Rwanda. Yes, they are doing
Kenya.
that. And they are very fast in moving at this. So that is their selling point. Why not Nigeria, that have the biggest economy relatively among the African sub-region, if we need to take the lead? So it is very important, because investors will only invest in places that are bankable. When they see that you are committed, your policies are consistent, the forex is stabilized, then they will be willing to come in and invest their money. But anything falls short of this, we make them to think about other alternatives. Rwanda is there, Cote d'Ivoire is there. They are adding values to their economy. They are taking the logistic, and then they are not just selling all this end product. And in this conversation, I think it's very important for us to equally talk about the SMEs, because the transaction between maybe somebody from Kano or Lagos with Ghana should not be stiff, most especially in payment system. For example, they can leverage on the Pan-African payment system so that you don't need to use dollar, because these are small economic hubs that we need them. Why is this important? Because when you are able to mop up all this, then the growth will start from bottom to top. But if you are just telling us about the 250 billion, blah, 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 and then people are hungry, then they will not be able to key in the way it ought to be, because what majority of Nigerians are saying, that they are just seeing statistics, economic statistics. Nigerians have moved from this, but is that guaranteeing that an average Nigerian can have food on his or her table? So these are the conversations that the government need to look into, and then make sure that they are able to integrate the SMEs in this journey.
I like the fact that you mentioned the SMEs. Dr. Korede, perhaps the biggest fallout, is the widening gap between ambition and implementation.
It sure is, because ideas rule the world, they say. You can have ideas. Everybody that intends to grow and develop, actually inspired to say, I like to do this. But you need money to be able to, bring this to fruition, reality. Mm-hmm. And the scriptures say that money answereth all things, which includes making sure that your idea becomes a reality. So how do you get money? How do you do all this as an SME? I train people in entrepreneurship, and I do this in the MSME, sector. you can look at the influence you have. When you know that you're seen as a person that has integrity, you can look out for business angels within your community. You can look for the
Are there business angels?
Yes, they are. They are. If you have a good idea, you have a nice concept. I'm doing a book now in honor of somebody that is advancing, in life graciously, and the person is taking it up. You understand? So it is something that, despite the fact that we have the challenges in our economy, there are still people who will believe in that wonderful idea that you have. Work on yourself. Are you a person of integrity? Are you somebody that they can invest in, that they can give money to, and you actually do what you promise to do with that money? So you can do that in the first instance. And in the part of government, the Small Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria, SMEDAN, they are there. They have a lot of money, and they're actually giving out to those who apply, who are qualified to bring their ideas to fruition. The National Directorate of Employment, NDE, they're also doing a lot.
NISEL.
NDE.
And NISEL too.
And NISEL too. They are doing a lot to assist people. But you just have to realize all this and then take advantage of this. If you apply in an agency and you are denied, don't feel bad, don't lose hope. Check out, redot the I's and recross the T's. Check out what are those things that made you fail that first attempt. Go to another agency.
By NDE, you mean the National Directorate of Employment?
Right.
Okay, but I mean, employment levels, especially for the young people, is still very high. So when you say they're doing very well, I want to understand what you mean by that.
What I mean by that is this. NDE will not actually get you a white-collar job. But if you need training to be able to do that, bring to fruition those ideas that you have in the area of entrepreneurship, in the area of MSMEs, in the area of skills, they will give you the skills that you need to do this.
Fantastic. Many thanks, Dr. Curry.
They also link you to credit as well.
Okay. All right.
That's good news.
If the credit is available, we want to know the banks giving credit. If they are, what's the interest rate? So many questions, really. We'd like our viewers to know that they can be a part of this conversation. There's a number on the screen. Feel free to send in your messages, comments, questions, recommendations, whatever it is as regards this topic. Dr. Irame, I'd like to get back to you. Some people think that, we're just sitting to talk and probably we're progressing backwards. I do not know what that means, but maybe you can break it down, because we're still talking about basics, right? We're talking about food on our table. We're talking about electricity, transportation. Meanwhile, people are beginning to talk about AI, digital innovation, and emerging technologies. Now, with all of this conversation, do you think that Africa would miss out on what is currently moving the world? Talking about AI, digital innovation, and of course, emerging technologies.
Well, I must admit that Africa is a latecomer in the international system, but that does not really mean that African cannot, cope with with other countries in the international system. And this is because isolationism is a luxury no state can afford, and even the rest of the world understands that they also need Africa to grow. And in all this, there are places of exchange of technologies, there are places of collaborations, and places of alignments and realignments. It's all about what Africa sees as a priority. And what does that really mean? And the emphasis should be that Africa needs to understand that the world itself has grown so far. And if you acknowledge this as a fact, what then do you do? Is to say at what stage is the world today, and what can Africa contribute in terms of that growth. True, Africa has a lot to contribute to the world, and Africa has contributed to the world, but Africa needs to act faster. And in all this, how does Africa act faster? First, we must begin to talk about right leadership. We begin to talk about purposeful policies to really address this issue, because the international system itself, as you say, is more like a competition, it's more like a race. Nobody's waiting for anybody, right? A problem in Africa can be a blessing in Europe. So whatever it is, Africa needs to first admit that there's a challenge, then begin to think how then do you measure up with some other countries. Now, even if you look at the global south very well, the geography of the global south, you see that some countries that were formerly branded as third world countries, developing countries, or highly indebted countries, countries, they have also, grown in this rank. So they are not longer comparable to where some other African countries are. And what does that mean? It's the greater implication is that some of these countries, they have recognized that economic problems, internal crisis can be a challenge to them meeting up with the other countries in the world, and they have ensured that they put what they call purposeful policies to address this issue. So yes, Africa has a challenge. Africa has a challenge of economic problems. Africa has in security crisis. Africa has a lot of issues, youth unemployment, poverty, and some other things like that. But some of these, the good thing about some of these kinds of CU African conferences and other conferences that African leaders have been holding is to acknowledge the fact that there's a challenge and what best possible alternatives we will do about that. And this is not far-fetched from the truth, because Africa needs to develop. Africa must develop. Africa must grow. Africa must meet up with the new challenges. There are new challenges, like you talked about the AI and other new technologies and everything like that. And Africa needs to also do that. So in doing that, African leaders must be purposeful to ensure that while trying to meet up in a globalized world, we don't become victims, but rather victors. Perhaps we might not be able to to overtake most of these Western countries, like I earlier said, but we must be able to get to a point whereby we are trying to measure up considerably, because that is where the world is going to. So as it stands down, Africa has no choice than to develop. Africa has no choice than to get informed with the recent technologies that's happening in the world. Africa has no choice than to align itself with global happenings, and this is the only way Africa can survive in a highly competitive world today.
Whenever they say Africa needs to step up, I just can't wrap my head around that. 60, 70 years ago, China was poor. They didn't have anything. Singapore was there. What did they do right for them to get to where they are today? Can it be possible in Africa without massive, massive investment in research and education when it comes to tech and all that? All our tech in Nigeria is being run by foreign companies. How can we encourage startups like we have in the Silicon Valley and all that? How can we encourage it? Do we have the political will actually to do it?
If you study what's happening in Africa very well, in fact, even if you look at Africa very well and see the configurations or the kinds of indices you want to use to study African countries, you see that those indices themselves might be fundamentally flawed. And this is because some African countries have also, grown considerably in terms of economic development, technology, and all sectors of development. And what it also tells me and Gio is that there are some lessons we can also borrow from African countries on how to develop about these issues. And you talked about the whole issue about technology and other things. And don't forget that technology itself, it's another form of power to other countries. And this itself must be jealously guided. So no country is really willing to to release the kinds of technology they have, because for them it is in their interest to hold those technologies and continue to use them in what I call comparative advantage. But of course, Africa itself is not losing sight about those issues. In terms of technology, in terms of technological growth, Africa itself is developing. Even in Nigeria itself, there's a whole lot of youth that are involved in tech, and they are doing so well. But like I said, now what is more important is that we need to get to a realization that we cannot do but invest heavily on technology. And when we accept that as a fact, then we begin to say, what best do we do, to address those kinds of issues. Take, for instance, it's just like you are running in a country where, if people wake up in the morning, they have to go through the metro connected to the power grid. People have to come down from their high houses from the power sector because of the lift and everything. And if those things are not put in place, it means people won't go to work. It means the economy could be on a standby. So we need to get to that point whereby we realize that without technology, without artificial intelligence, without sophisticated technology, Africa is going nowhere. And when we really accept that as a truth, then the next thing, which becomes very much inevitable, is to say, what do we really do? And how do we ensure that there's a much investment in technology? Because the way technology goes now and the way the world is going, it's obvious that technology rules the world. So that's exactly the task before African leaders.
The task before African leaders, Nigeria, of course, is on that table, and we hope that, like we're discussing here, some changes begin to happen. Dr. Ibrahim, I'd like to get back to you. We've spoken about technology and all of that, but, let's talk about how Nigeria can actually take the stage in terms of true leadership in the continent when local manufacturers, you mentioned the SMEs. I'm thinking at this round table, did we have some of the SMEs participate? If they did, at what level? Or was it just the big corporations or big organizations, the big names that were at the table? Because I mean, if the SMEs, they're the main drivers of the economy. If they're not a part of it, then how do we go forward? Now, the SMEs, there are so many struggles, we hope that these new tax laws, of course, will deal with multiple taxation, which has been a major issue. We still have the issue of port congestion, high operating costs, so many other issues. How do we now begin to scale? You've been using that word, to scale up. How do we scale some of our SMEs so that, they can become big corporations too, and also make our economy better?
Thank you. I think the government policy need to have a kind of paradigm shift to realize the involvement of the SMEs, because they are quite important. They are easily reachable, but in the summit, why it was important that the big industrial CEOs attended was that is where the major policy is being taken, and then the involvement of the SMEs can come later because it can trickle down to their survival. Take, for instance, if you look through the Dangote or any of the industries, you see that there's people that equally produce some of the things for them that they use, maybe the packages and then the logistics, which is part of the SMEs moving forward. Having said that, moving forward, we expect that the infrastructures need to be put in place, because when you have the right infrastructure in place, then the SMEs will be able to move faster and work without much challenges. For example, we've mentioned the issue of power. Now let's concentrate on logistics. People that are selling, producing, they waste much time in connecting. An average seller of cow from Yobe or Maiduguri, we still need to carry their goods and their cow down to Lagos using the trailers. We need infrastructures that will connect Maiduguri, and in this time, I mean infrastructure in terms of rail, in terms of making the payment system to be seemingly effective, like what I just mentioned, the Pan-African payment system. And then you need to create an economic hub where the SMEs can easily get funding, as my colleagues rightly put it. But the challenges of writing the the business plan and then following up is making some of them to queue out of this access for the funding.
Why?
So because you need to write, you need to follow, and it's not all of them that are really educated. So you need to make it in a way that you involve more of the cooperative, and then you get them registered, you get an educated person to manage those funds, and then see to their implementation, and then coordinate their activities. But now we only see most of them. I do see them on the television, but are they having jingles? Are they having their publicity? I would say is poor. People that did not have access to light, how will they be able to watch NTA? So are they speaking in our local languages? You need all of this. You need to take this to them, because there is connection and link between unemployment and insecurity. So if the government can just do all of this together, then they'll be able to mop up all these challenges of insecurity, and then when people have hope, then they can have, what is it called? They can see the country as part of their own, and then they work for the betterment of the country. But when people have lost hope, most especially in the system, in the government policy, then they will not be willing to be part of that system. And then it affects even the turnout in elections.
Yes, because I look at it, Nigeria is at the center of everything. We're just right in the middle, and other countries are looking up to us, and we have a population to prove that we can do it. A younger population that, when they leave this country, they excel wherever they are. And even these tech companies that we're talking about, there are a lot of Nigerians there who are working for these tech countries, outside Nigeria. Now, let's look beyond optimism and branding. Is Africa truly ready to become a major global force in the world now? Are we truly, truly ready? Not just talks.
While governments are ready, based on what they say and the policies that we have, the question should be, are we as citizens of Africa, we Africans, are we really, really ready? I have just two answers. In the first instance,
is it a bottom-top approach or a top-bottom approach?
It has to be a bottom-top approach in terms of the responsibility of the citizens.
But the top also have the political will.
The political will is there. What are the political wills? One, the policy has to be there. Secondly, government is putting together funding and financing. I'd like to, interject a correction here. When government agencies that I mentioned earlier, and quite a number of them, gives credit, they will not direct you to commercial banks for those cutthroat percentages. They have their own single digits, how do you call it now? Single digits that will come on top of the money that you borrow, about 9%. So that is, what government agencies who do that, that's what they do. And we're saying that development has to be a bottom to the top approach, while government also comes from the top too. In the bottom. Nigeria, in terms of population, we're about 60% of Africa population. The youth in Nigeria is about 70-75% of our demography. If the government of the day has given, and is still giving, a lot of money to our state governors in Nigeria, local government councils, quite a number of them, majority of them now, by the encouragement of Mr. President, are now getting their allocations directly. As they always say, the politicians will say that politics is local. I dare say that development also is local. By giving monies to governors directly and increased allocation, and local council, quite a majority of them directly, they are supposed to be responsible to bring forth this development locally. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu in Aso Rock will not come to my village and use, his whatever to develop anything in my village. He gets the money to my governor. My governor allows my council chairman to get his allocation. I want to make use of that statement.
Do they really give the allocation
Initially,
to the
they
councils?
were not. But Mr. President, at various fora, had said it loud. He had called governors out, and we have his media space. Please help me talk to our governors to allow this local governments receive and make sure, manage their allocations directly. And over time, I said a large percentage of local government councils are now getting their allocations directly. My own home state, for example, and we're seeing development from the grassroots, bottom up. So I dare say that while government is responsible to bring about funding, to bring about policies, to bring about words of encouragement, directives, and instructions, it is the responsibility of those who are supposed to bring to bear these policies to actually be serious about it and have this right. A policy for state governments now, you can actually have your own power. You can manufacture, you can how do you say that, you can generate your own power locally within each state. Enugu State has been on it. Edo State is on it. Lagos State have started over a decade ago. You understand? And other states too are trying to join it. Don't try to be a part of it, just latch onto it. The policy is there for you. You've been given the right to go ahead and generate your own power. And you have the money to put this to bear. You have the intellect. You have a lot of professors, qualified people within each state, if not local governments, to bring this to bear. So it has to do with the will of the people at the grassroots, those who are our leaders at the grassroots, that the federal government has been giving so much money to actually get serious about development.
All right. Dr. Korede, you talk about seriousness, and that leads me to my next question. Dr. Erame, while Dr. Korede was talking, I'm just wondering if forums like this can deal with the credibility gap, which is a major issue in terms of policy announcements and actual execution, which, many governments, not just Nigeria,
implementation
is guilty of, and we see that credibility gap is widening, also widening the gap between the urban growth, if you like, urban development, and what's happening in the rural areas. Speak to us really, away from the investment drive and all of that. Speak about how governments are run in Africa. The credibility issue. What will solve that problem? Because if that is not solved, I mean, it's just going to be a one-sided development, if you like, or if you like, a certain sector benefiting from what that government says or what government does.
I think that you are right when you talked about the whole issue about maybe I would rather say implementation challenge. But you see, the real problem is that we must be very, very factual with ourselves to say that we have not really, taken off. And this is because if you see the kinds of issues Africa still deals with today, you understand that we are far from, taking off really about sustainable development. Look at the kinds of crises that we had faced and been emerged immediately in our post-colonial periods, and we are still emerging those crises. You see that even leaders themselves acknowledge that those crises themselves can eventually pull down any continent from sustainable development. So one thing is to say that we are committed to this, which has always been the case. Another thing is to say that how then do we really want to achieve this one. Then another more important thing is to do what they call a comparative analysis. Now, if you see issues like, and it is in this context, ideas like the African peer review mechanism, the new partnership for African development was formed. This is, these are kinds of policies to ensure that there's a one way of, looking at what all African leaders are doing, and this is to ensure that Africa is, on the right path. But that's not been the case. Take, for instance, in ECOWAS, while we are trying to, struggle with the ECOWAS to ensure that there's a sustainable development within the continent, we had the recent breakaway of some countries who went to form the AES, which itself can be a major problem. And if you study very well within the continent itself, there's absolutely no region of the continent that is not plunged with various forms of conflict and insecurity. And some of these issues have become much more protracted and obstinate to deal with. Sometimes efforts to deal with them themselves further complicates the whole issue. And we must accept that most of the countries we strive to want to be like, they have conquered most of these issues. And if we are still struggling with some of these kinds of issues, I say that it's not even about the policy or the implementation. It is the fact that there are still a lot of internal crises that are continuing, to make sure that some of these policies do not work. So while it is a good thing that African leaders continue to, re-emphasize the need for, by policy making and policy, emphasis, there's a need to look much more deeper down to see what is really happening and to what extent we could drive this. Because you see, most of these things we continue to, underlook, they are very, very much important. Take, for instance, over the years, what most African countries have done is to ensure, is to see that most of their budget is focused more on defense, more on security, to protect lives and property. The economies of most of these African countries as well have suffered over time. And in some countries that have also gotten it right, the persistent natures of conflict themselves have further, pulled them back. So instead of us focusing more on economic on economy, the focus of most of these African countries is how to even achieve peace and security and relative stability. And if you don't do this, there's no way you can achieve sustainable economic growth. And that has been a major characteristics of most of the African countries. So either we have situations of some of them just pulling out of conflict, some entering into the same conflict, or some having a relapse of these conflicts. And most of these issues themselves, they are very, very much fundamental to how a nation grows and how a nation does not. So one thing, like I said, and I will keep on saying, is for there to be a brilliant policy which is not in any way far-fetched, and of course implementation itself, but to also look beyond to say what are those likely factors that might even affect the policy itself. A whole lot of internal factors, and that is exactly where we should get to. You made you made some analysis of some countries. You made some you listed some countries that have also gone these issues, and you use that as a basis to say, is Africa really very ready to say this? And those kind of analysis themselves are very, very much better. It's just like within normal peer reviews. The only way you can know the extent to which you are working or the extent to which you are achieving something is to look at your peers to say that, okay, how were they able to achieve some of these goals? What were the factors they put in place? What were the factors they ensure that are not troubling them at that point, and what possible goals can we do? And when you do these comparisons, you really understand where Africa is at the moment, what Africa needs to do, and what Africa must do. Thank you.
Yes, I'm still going to stay with you before we go on break. You just itemized some things that were, sort of discussed at the forum. But in your opinion, what is the biggest uncomfortable truth that African leaders at the forum sort of avoided talking about? We've seen xenophobic attacks in South Africa. We've seen in Ghana telling Nigerians to leave and all that. So if we have that on the table, how can we come as a continent, work together and ensure that we progress beyond where we are now?
If you have listened to what I've been saying over time, is that even in the whole issue about Africa, ECOWAS and other things, I'm good at that our own President Bola Ahmed Tinubu also emphasized the need for what they call free movement, and this itself is what and I think that there are possible going to be some kinds of agreement between Nigeria and Rwanda. We cannot talk about economic growth, we cannot talk about regional integration where there are no free movements. People who live in Benin Republic, people who live in Niger and Chad must be able to come into Nigeria freely, one, to do business, two, to also stay, and three, to also acquire a longer stay. And this is because, you see, business is kinds of, if you want a private sector driven business or to invest heavily in business, you must provide the enabling environment. You must provide policies. We cannot be talking about people traveling from Nigeria. What's the distance between Nigeria and Benin Republic, and trying to change money is a problem. So at this point, we must begin to say that if we want to achieve sustainable economic growth in Africa, what are those issues that will really drive it? It's any region can say they want to achieve sustainable economic integration, but you must begin to ask yourself, what are those things that are going to drive it? Issues about free movement, issues about eradication of all forms of custom duties, issues about common currency. These are very much fundamental, and that does not mean that most countries who do this do not really. If you take, for instance, the experience of the European Union, and I could remember vividly while I was in Germany, there's nowhere in Europe you cannot get a means of transportation from Germany to. And what that means is that first, they have conquered the whole issues about the bottlenecks of movement within themselves. Once you have a Schengen visa, you are able to navigate around Europe, one. And two, once you have what they call the euro, you can trade visibly everywhere. So those kinds of things encourage people to live in Germany and work in Brussels, Eindhoven, or some other places, and they also return. So there's a form of safety, and there's a form of recognition, and there's also a form of feel at home among the citizens. So what the implications of that is that situating businesses will no longer be a problem. So if you ask me very well, I say that Africa has a very brilliant idea, but there's a need to look deeper to say that how are we ready to achieve these goals? What are those factors that have been affecting the actualization of these goals? To what extent have we addressed these factors? And what possible experiences can we also borrow from other regions to better the lot of Africa? Thank you so much.
Right, in a bid to better the lot of Nigeria, it's important to mention that the Africa CEO Roundtable actually began in 2012. This is 2026, so that's like the 14th edition. So the real question for the average Nigerian will be, or the average African will be, what has been benefits of such forums? I mean, to the lives of, average Africans. So if you like the average Nigerian, if you want to relate it to our own situation right here. That's what we're still talking about, of course. So we'll take a break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. Of course, read some of the comments that we have from our viewers. Please stay. Many thanks for staying with us. It's still Good Morning Nigeria, live on the network service of the NTA. Our guests are still very much with us, and we'll now go into some of the messages that we got from our viewers, and read this one from Ahmed Babadikwa from Maiduguri. It says the CEO Summit in Kigali is a timely platform for Nigerian leaders to forge cross-border partnerships, attract investment, and tap into continental trade under the AFCFTA. Today, it can boost sectors like fintech and logistics. In the future, it positions Nigeria as a key player in Africa's integrated economy. All right, thank you so much for your comment. This one says the Africa CEO Forum is a welcome development. However, African leaders must unite, fix, and protect the resources of the continent. The talking should be put into practice, and the leaders should have the political will in order for Africa to move forward. That's from Alaji Garko in Karusite in Abuja. Another one says Africa CEO Forum is a nice move for robust investment on the entire continent of Africa. In Nigeria, there are untapped natural resources. What impact would this forum make by making sure these resources are fully tapped and utilized to boost Nigeria and Africa's economy? Thank you. That's from Chris Simon. Great question there. Do not have the answer. I'm sure our guest would respond much later. Another one says, good morning. I was so surprised your analyst didn't mention SUPA, the president program that has trained over 100,000 artisans and awaiting certification. This program have done well for youths in Nigeria. All right, thank you for your observation. Another one says these major countries like China didn't become wealthy overnight. They built from within. They adopted several strategies and working strategies to implement their policies for both producers and consumers, citizens and non-citizens. All right, thank you for your feedback. All right, Jimmy.
Let's respond to some of them before I read the ones I have. Talk.
Okay. I would like to respond to two major issues that are raised there, like the super initiative. Yes, it's a step in the right direction. However, if you look at the ratio, you will see that it has not really captured a lot of people, because in a country of over 220 million people, and then you are just focusing on this. But as Dr. rightly mentioned, I think the state governors, the local government areas need to do more. The focus is always on the federal government, and there should be a way out of this that the federal government need to drum up some of his initiative and how much is being allocated to this local government and see to the implementation. Because if those things are not done, all the light again will be beamed on the federal government. So we need to do serious work. I think the government needs to do serious work on that. Away from that, the other aspect that caught my mind is the implementation. Yes, a lot of money. Africa is not poor in the real sense, because we have people that are even richer than some of the CEO. I think one of them once mentioned that, yes, there are Nigerians that have more cash than him. That's to show you, but these funds are stuck in some European and Western countries. If they are being redirected into Africa, it's just a kind of having this vision of seeing Africa first as our priority. And these are some of the things that we need to re-engage, most especially the citizens, for them to see Africa first, and those that are rich, for them to redirect the fund into funding African industries and then assisting in the right direction. So how does government implement all the decisions that have been made? This is very, very critical. When there are no metrics that you can use to measure, then that will just be an effort in futility. It will just be talk and talk. But there should be a kind of a limelight, a lime gap between what is supposed to be achieved, whether in the short term and then in the long run. So all of this is very, very important for government to see that every decisions, every policies that are made, there should be timeline for their actualization.
What about this trend? You know, you talked about the subnationals keying into what the federal government is doing. What about this trend where political associates only benefit from the policies, or if you like, the programs of government? Is that a way to go?
Relatively, even though that will amount to injustice, but if the people that they are still giving to the needy, that for example, there was a time that there was flood in Kogi State, some of the beneficiaries were not the victims. So because the nature of our politics, you know, the way we play it, you notice that they want to service their, how will I put it? They want to service those that worked for them, most especially during their election and their political associate. This is not the right step in the right direction,
okay.
I think.
Okay, thank you. Let me read some of the messages that come in so that Dr. Korede and Dr. Nicholas will respond to them, because we are beginning to wind down and time is not on our side. I'll begin from Mohammed Awal Musa Afame, Greenwald Observers Limited in Kano. He said, with the forum's core theme focusing on scale imperative, how do large-scale corporate expansions plan to integrate local, rural and informal economies into regional supply chains? Can we highlight successful models where multinational scaling directly translates to grassroots job creation and poverty reduction rather than just localized urban wealth? And Akeju Olagbaju said, it is uncommendable to believe that Rwanda is doing better than Nigeria. Rwanda has a population of 15 million and about 18% of the population are living in urban areas. These urban areas are just Kigali and 6 other main cities located in 4 different provinces. Perhaps a visit to Rwanda rural areas will tell you that Nigeria is doing better, but however, we need to do more by not using Rwanda as metrics in economy and provision of infrastructure to support the growth. We actually didn't use Rwanda as a metric, it was just a conversation. Now, another one said, this is a good show. I love it. It's my first time watching this. This show is great. And you didn't add your name. We would love to know your name. And another one said, without adding his name too, Nigeria's participation at the Africa CEO Forum in Kigali, Rwanda, highlighted the country's important role in Africa's economic growth and regional integration. The presence of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu and Nigerian business leaders demonstrated Nigeria's commitment to attracting investment, promoting industrialization, and strengthening intra-African trade under AfTA. The forum also provided an opportunity for Nigeria to engage investors and discuss key areas such as infrastructure, energy, technology, and economic development. Mohammed Isa O. Kotonkarfi in Kogi State. Another one said, policies need action and also steps to ensure it's effective and functional. Strict rules and regulations guiding these policies will help them make it effective. And another one said, Ben Uzo in Enugu, Africa states should focus more on national interests of strong security to align with foreign policy on security. Economic development do not flourish in situation of insecurity. So African states should fight insecurity first. Dr. Korede.
Right. We want to appreciate the person who said this program is wonderful. Being his or her first time, watching Good Morning Nigeria is superb, no question.
Thank you.
I'd like to respond to the first interrogation, which talks about how multinationals can actually come down lines to that the grassroots can benefit. You see, for decades I've been having factories, multinationals coming to Nigeria. They've been having their marketing and sales unit go around the states, local governments, and all salesmen. In the course of that, you find a number of people who work in those organizations carrying out what we call industrial espionage, which means going into the factory, trying to copy what they have been doing, and legally, legitimately get that registered in another name, a different brand, making it a legal entity to which manufacturing goes on. That is why you will not find in the world, in the class of soft drinks, you don't find only, say, if I may, let me not mention brands here because NCBB, you cannot find a single brand, being in the market. You find other brands coming. So you can see that there are influences, right. Then multinationals also have the CSR unit, corporate social responsibility, to which if you can approach them for one support or the other, they do, assist communities. They have a budget for that under the CSR our policy. The government of the day, by the special grace, has actually, come up with a policy through the Central Bank of Nigeria. If you have a factory that is on running and you require about $1 billion naira to put together your factory to let it roll back, to life, as the manufacturing of Nigeria has been clamoring. You just approach the CBN, the Development Finance Department, and let them see the proof that you truly have a factory that needs help, not just story on paper. They will assist, and they've been assisting. It's down. All these things need to, be promoted more in the media for people to see. By doing this, gradually and surely, factories, industries are roaring back. I'd like to give an example of how people can grow from scratch, bottom up. Take example of the richest man in Africa. He did not start his business with Dangote refinery. No, he did not. He, as a young man, he was a trader and got assistance from an uncle. With integrity and seriousness of purpose, he built over time, getting legitimate credit here and there, putting them into good use. Now you see where he is today, and quite a number of them. The owner of Globalcom, I'm sorry to be mentioning brands also, whose mother was a petty trader, in fabrics in Ibadan. Learned from the mother and gradually, brought that to bear, in what he was doing. Same more as well. My mother too, despite the fact that, she was, a nursing sister at the time, also had, little, businesses. She was
Plan Bs.
Plan Bs, B and C.
And C.
At the time, I learned from her, and then later.
I like the fact that you have mentioned your name with other billionaires.
Oh, so certainly.
I'm sure your community people will come for you after this program. Let's get to Dr. Irame. Dr. Irame, as we begin to round up the conversation, I'd like to know what you think, about some of the comments that have been made so far, and your final words, really, whether to leaders or to followers, about what we can do so we can become better.
Events are very commendable. Much particularly about two. One talks about the need to address security before we talk about development. It's a known fact everywhere, the security development nexus, that there's certainly no way you can achieve sustainable economic development without addressing insecurity, without addressing human insecurity, without addressing the whole issues of persistent conflicts that are continuing to ravage the entire Africa. That is much more important. Then I'm also very much interested in the other comment that talks about the Chinese experience and other elite countries' experience, and that's what I've always been emphasizing. One thing is to say we aspire to be great in the world today. Another thing is to say how does greatness comes? What are the factors that one must put in place before you can achieve greatness? And in that context, and just like I said, there's a need for deeper reflection to say where exactly is Africa in the global system. One, what has Africa achieved? What has Africa not achieved? How can we achieve this? And what do we tend to achieve this? What is is our short-term goal and our long-term goal. Take, for instance, what we call the African Union Silencing the Gun Agenda 1, which also forms the greater part of the AU Agenda 2063. That seems to be a short and a long-term goal to say this is exactly what Africa needs to achieve within this period. But in all this, one thing that is most certain is that we must address insecurity so as to sustain sustainable economic development. So, as one of my parting words, I would want to say that the onus lies within the African leaders, to take the bull by the horn. And this is much more important, not because the citizens themselves are not much important in this context, but at this particular stage, we need leadership. We need the kinds of leadership that is very proactive to the core aspirations of the people and to address the core challenges of the people. And that's why I emphasize the issues about the New African Partnership of African Development and the African Peer Review Mechanism. We need those kinds of initiatives, and we also need lead countries like Nigeria, South Africa, Rwanda, Ghana, and a whole lot of to play lead roles in terms of lifting Africa from its current stage to where Africa so desires. And in doing this, it's not just going to be beneficial to Nigeria, but it's going to be beneficial to the citizens and in fact the whole continent. So the kinds of goals we should pursue in Africa is a one Africa, like based on the dreams of the late Muammar Gaddafi. We need to see a one Africa whereby we have unified policy, we have a common African passport, we have a common African currency. These are the ways the world itself will take us very serious, and these are some kinds of homegrown initiatives we will adopt over time that makes it look like Africa is really on the path of sustainable development, one, and it's also on the path of trying to catch up with the rest of the world. Thank you so much.
Okay, Dr. Nicholas, thank you so much. As we're rounding up, actually, Dr. Ibrahim, what would success from this forum actually look like, in your opinion, a year from now?
To me, success will be that Africa should realize that at this point in time, Africa cannot compete with the global economy with fragmented markets. And the choice is simple. We need to scale up, we need to integrate, and equally add values to what we have, like the natural resources, so that we can create and measure up. Fix the infrastructures. If not, we'll be left behind in the global economic statistics.
That's a tall order in 1 year. Do you think that's realistic, or we should just plan for another conference?
We should plan, not... I think we should walk the talk. So
we should walk the
talk. We should walk the talk. So that, as he rightly mentioned it, we should have the short-term goals and then the long-term goals, but they should be coherent so that we could achieve what is really intended. Okay,
like countries like China did. Dr. Korode, how can we revive, briefly, the cooperative banks we used to have before that just disappeared overnight?
It's unfortunate that that system that has been assisting average Nigerians in various communities and organizations to have access to a lot of things that are needed has really come down based on sentiments of corruption, sentiments of favoritism we brought about impunity within the cooperative sector. These things need to be revised. That's why I keep saying that policies are there, programs are there, supports are there from government, but it has to do with you and I. Integrity of purpose, patriotism to the nation is very key. So on the African scale, also, Africans must act with integrity. Africans must be patriotic to our nation state within the continent. It is by doing so that this development that we so desire will come to fruition.
Indeed, very, very interesting. The development that we want will come to fruition. Thank you so much. And when I was watching President Tinubu in Kigali talking, I said, oh my God, if he was 20 years younger, I wonder what he would do with this country. So many ideas, so many there.
Great ideas.
Yes, Dr. Korede, Reverend Dr. George Korede Martin, CEO, EDI Entrepreneurship School here in Abuja studio. Thank you so much for your time as always.
Of the Billionaire League.
Yes, Billionaire League. We appreciate you. Yeah, we appreciate you always.
And a zillionaire in the making.
Yes, inshallah.
Thank you very much. Pleasure is mine.
Dr. Nicholas Rame is a senior research fellow and head of the Division of International Politics at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, NIIA. Joined us from our Lagos studio. We we thank you so much for your insight into this conversation. And Dr. Abdulrazak Saliu Ibrahim, Department of Political Science and International Relations, Nile University, Abuja, also one of our regulars. Always, we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. And that's Good Morning Nigeria for today. Thanks so much for watching. I am Jumai yourself.
All right, to our first-time viewer, you can watch NTA Good Morning Nigeria Monday to Friday from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. We hope to see you tomorrow. Join us. I'm Yen Ray John. Live locked on the NTA.